So, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Sheikh Abdullah Salim Cultural Center series of talks with the
Kuwait Institute for Scientific Research.
KISR. My name is Marwa Al-Fadli, and I'm the Senior Facilitator of the Natural History Museum. And today I will be the talk moderator. These talks seek to highlight the significant effort made by KISR in the educational, scientific, and cultural, which contributed to supporting the scientific progress of Kuwait. Today's talk, it's going to be for 45 minutes. In the last 10 to 15 minutes, it's going to be for question and discussion. Our guest for this evening is Dr. Shakir Al-Hazim. Dr. Shakir boasts an impressive resume. He is currently an associated researcher in coral reef ecosystem-based management in the marine resources. And today he will talk to us about the marine environment in Kuwait and the coral reef. Hello, Dr. Shakir. Good evening.
Thank you. Good evening. Good evening, everyone, for this talk. First time to do the talk through Zoom or electronic talk. Today I'm going to talk about the Kuwait Marine Environment in the focus or in the control focus of coral reefs. Coral reefs, as we know, they are existed in I cannot change yes, I did. We had started our history with coral reefs studies, ecology in KISR from the early 80s. And I joined KISR in 1990, where I had to be involved in these coral ecology in Kuwait. And I have found it is the coral reef, as my background was fisheries when I came from America. When I came to KISR, I had the idea to explore the environment of these fishes of Kuwait, where I found the best resemble of the environment of fishes is around coral reefs. And when I explored our coral reefs, we found it's a beautiful, existed in extreme environment where we had extreme temperatures. We had really all the conditions in the Kuwaiti waters was very stressed environment where we find these reefs existed with that, we call it the limit of existence. So it is highlighted worldwide for existing coral reefs in the north of the Gulf in Kuwait. Now, these studies, when I involved in the 1990, it was a general studies. When I came back after Kuwait liberation, it was specifically oriented project through the United Nations through assessing our reefs and how it is doing in terms of the conditions and how it has happened and what left after the invasion and the war in the Gulf. Anyhow, we concluded in that project in 1995 with external consultant, Dr. Peter Harrison from Australia, Southern Cross University, and he did a marvelous work with us in exploring the environment of these reefs and improving our knowledge in how these reefs are existed in this extreme environment, even though they were spawning. At the time, we had documented the spawning in Kuwait, and we were so happy finding our corals reefs are spawning. So evaluating our marine environment, they are okay, even it is in a stress environment, and they are producing spawning. So we were so happy celebrating or documenting that finding in 1995. And we had a sequence of the studies, and after that, we had been approached by Kuwait Oil Company to study their experiment, actually using artificial reef around an area, protected area. I mean, you can see it in Ras Jalea, and it is close by our Kitat Jalea reef. As we see in this map, showing all the main reefs we have in Kuwait, we have 3 main reefs in these 3 islands: Kubbar Island, Garo Island, and al-Maradim. And there is patch of reefs all over in the coastal line. But it is focused in that experiment of using artificial reef by KOC to study the success of these artificial reef. We find that it is a beautiful setup to experiment on how we can restore our environment using these artificial reef. And we find in 2013, at the end of this research, we found it is possible to rely or depend on these artificial reefs in terms of fisheries rather than corals, because in that area it was so turbid, it was sediment problems in that area, where we find it is impossible to have corals settle on these artificial reefs. But we did find, separate or a few colonies of corals in the ground nearby. But it is on that artificial reef, it was only solitary corals. And that solitary corals, it won't build on this artificial reef, where we had the aim of this to find corals to build on this artificial reef, and we end up having growing reef. After that, we had proposed to do an experiment around Kubbar Island. It is the worst site or the most damaged site coral reefs, because it's visited the most, and therefore we had thought we can experiment on using these artificial reefs around these reefs as restoring these reefs in the project in rehabilitation of Kubbar Island coral reef. We end up in 2018 with these artificial reef, as we see it in Ras Jalea, in Kubbar. We find it is the artificial reef is succeeding again with fishes rather than seeing the corals building on it. It is a simple reason that was because we were seeking the permission from EPA to highlight the importance of EPA and had to control our site in Kuwait. It is with experiment point of view with the permit of EPA, and we are only experimenting using artificial reef near coral reefs to restore this lost reefs, big patches of reef and lost coral reefs around Kubbar. So we are coming back to our corals, as I forgot to mention. We have actually 35 species of corals existed and 124 fish species around. These findings or these highlights were summarized in a book that's been produced in 1997. That book had highlighted all the history of studies in Kisser we had and reporting what fishes are around in these reefs. Anyhow, we had, after this book came out and highlighting how the impacts are and highlighting how natural stresses are in bleaching and distraction from people around in these islands. Also highlighting the existence of sea urchins. They were claimed they are grazing on these reefs and making it a weakened skeleton in a way where it can be damaged easily, and that is really a concern. Where I had studied these and found sea urchins, they are abundant and distributed evenly with these three reefs, but it was more around al-Maradim at the time, because we had a marina built around this al-Maradim, where it had impacted around in that reefs. And sea urchins, they actually existed with the plenty of food or algae existed around when it is damaged reef. That damaged reef would be covered with algae. This algae is plenty of food for sea urchins where they outbreak and they make their way. And at that time, I highlighted it high sea urchins, Econometer Mathai, existed around al-Maradim. But it wasn't any indication of degrading our reefs. Sea urchins existed in a balanced way to keep the site cleaned after that coral skeleton, and that clean site, it will be provided for coral larvae to settle in and had to grow and recover these sites. But the most impact we had is from the debris we had around our reefs. For example, we had constructors, when they had any plans on the islands where they have excess of materials, they drop it off in these reefs. And talking about these coral plates, the big plates, they were upside down, killed, and with the slow growing corals, as we put in our mind, these corals can die within no time, where it has a growth of 3 centimeters a year. And it is really slow growing corals. And when you lose it, that's it. A recovery would take time to recover. Now, this is the most our concern with distraction. Now, how we can control that? It is a matter of public awareness. These broken pieces of corals were aimed to discuss it with the people on these islands, to use these break pieces and attach them to this artificial reef we experimenting in. But because we had it really in the end of the project, we didn't have the chance to really do that campaign and have the island the sea people or the divers or the island visitors to participate and use these broken pieces and put them on these artificial reef. Coming back to the distraction, we're having fishing nets, we're having that marina I have talking about. In the time before, we had a permanent stations. We survey permanent stations, and we find one in the south side of the island and one in the export side in the north of the island. And that stations were permanent. We surveyed it in a yearly time to highlight the changes over time on these reefs. And it was a coincidence to have this marina built in that area where we lost most of the reef around that area, and had high impact using cups to highlight sedimentation movements. The experiment highlighted actually the sediment movements around in al-Maradim compared with Garo and Cooper, because I was doing it evenly, so to highlight how much different they are in terms of sedimentation movements. And this is how it looks before the marina built, and this is how it became. So it is almost about 40% or 30% of the reef surrounding this island al-Maradim had been lost because of these marina. Unfortunately, it was a back experience when I was doing my master's in Australia. I was doing it in Heron Island, and this is the southernmost island. And this island were explored to be visited by tourists by building a marina. And that marina had been explosive used and made this marina access to the island, and it created a huge problem. And that is in 1934, after World War II. And that time, that marina had lost or caused to lose all these corals around in the reef flats, where in the lowest tide, these all reefs were exposed to air and died off. Then the engineers came back and with an idea of building a bond wall around the marina to limit these water movements when low tide, so it will highlight or keep some of the water in the reef side. And they had succeeded building this bond wall and kept this reef recovered, and by using a permanent survey site laid in the back of the bond wall and in the front of the bond wall by the Great Marine Park Authority, and then surveyed yearly and to highlight the success. And it was really successful moves in building artificial walls in these marina. Now coming back to Kubbar, where I had to study or highlight the changes with the time. We found in Kubbar Island, it is not really a significant changes, because we were using a permanent site, and that permanent sites were chosen to represent these reefs around an island, which is ecologically true, but it is in point of view of restoring or highlighting the damage, it is not really highlighting it with our studies. So as you see on that table, find there was no significant changes in Kubbar. Therefore, it is not really a good idea to highlight that the damage around in the reef with ecological point of view in terms of ecological survey, video surveys, that the method we were using. Now we had that marvelous idea using a drone by Dr. Mahdi Ulum, and it was his study when he came to do it, highlighting the reef abundance or density around in the island, and finding and comparing 2006 how it was covered in that area, highlighted with the changes gradual until we lost completely in 2016. We lost the whole area, and that is around 40% of the reef is gone in that area. So that was the right move. That we should have had our focus on. We should focus on the damaged area, and then we think of ideas how to restore or recover these areas. And that is that after in 2018, we had the recommendation to come up with a good plan to use artificial reef, to use larvae seeding, or a public awareness, or as simple as to protect these three islands by highlighting it with a law, protection law, and saving these islands. And we should develop a real plan to restore and rehabilitate Kubbar Island. And I think this is it on the end. What I had explained all the story. Now that in the end, it is our focus was in coral reefs for the marine environment. Marine environment, it cannot be seen well if we don't see it in a biological indicator as in coral reefs, because coral reefs can indicate how important of our loss in coral reefs, because they support the fisheries. They exist with the fisheries, high fisheries abundance in there. And also they protect the islands by this calcium carbonate buildup around in the island. It breaks the whole effect of these waves and erosion coming from the high wind and waves, protected by this strong skeleton breaking these waves down and saving our reefs on the island. And above all of that, actually, in the beach of these reefs, we find broken corals, and they develop what we call the white beaches, and that's the beauty of attraction in the island people tend to go to because of that beaches. Now, that's our focus. It's a coral reef ecology. Our focus to find what is happening to our marine environment and what we could do to restore our environment, and particularly to coral reefs, and also as in general in marine and marine of Kuwait Marine in terms of fish stock and other concerns on our marine. Now I'm ready for any questions. I think I reached the end of, unless if there is any highlight points I should make for people attending the talk. Anyhow, there is one point I have forgot to mention. We had really produced this book, The Coral and Coral Reef Fishes of Kuwait, in 2018 by changing the species names, because we had 2 species that's been changed, and these were fixed and reproduced that book with that edited species names. It's Acropora dawending and Parietes harrisoni. It was Parietes compressor at Big 4. Now I'm ready for questions. I'll leave it
Thank you, Doctor, for this insightful talk. Please, if you have any questions, can you put them in the chat? You can type them in the chat and we will read them to the doctor. So, Doctor, we have a couple of questions. One of them is, how does an artificial reef work?
Well, the artificial reef were used as the reef balls, and these reef balls were really successful in containing the fisheries. As I highlighted in 2013, the outcomes of our research assessing this artificial reef in Ras Jalea, but it wasn't keeping coral larvae around in these artificial reef. That was our concern. We need a complete success, having corals built on this artificial reef to grow and with the time and have more chance for fishes to stocking around in that artificial reef. Above all, we were using these artificial reef as a formation to control all the sedimentation movements, all the, whatever problems we have around in Cooper Island. These 1 ton size, hollow size with unfortunately I didn't have a picture, otherwise I showed it, but it's a reef balls. There's been a foundation there, it's well known, and these artificial reefs were very successful around an Oman experiments, and they had Acropora grown on it, Acropora harabensis and Acropora downwinding. It was built on this artificial reef, which is a really marvelous results I had received from Oman, and we're hoping our reefs will be as successful. With artificial reef, because we had a plan to use public awareness using these broken pieces around, because accidentally broken pieces, to attach these on this artificial reef. When they do it, these people will tend to protect them, because this is their moves, their experiment in terms of recovery and looking after these reefs. In the same point, we can highlight more these reefs are important, highlight more how it is good for the fisheries in terms of the success of this artificial reef with the growing natural reef on it.
Okay, we have another question, Doctor. Now that the project of the artificial reef stopped, when will it begin?
Well, it is the experiment design were written, and we are in the pipeline to have it funded to join back again and to highlight as the parts we didn't do, as attaching natural broken pieces of corals on this artificial reef, and also documenting the complete success of this artificial reef.
And another question, Doctor. Do you think it's important to announce coral reef as protected area?
Very important, actually, to protect our reefs, as it's been done everywhere in the world. I always admire the movement or the move of Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority when they had highlighted each island of the 2,000 kilometers long reefs in their east side of Australia, with regulations of site of fishing and site is no-take zone, and that way protected area as a marine park, protected and looked after for the next generation. It is really important to look after them by allowing these laws to protect them as a marine park.
Okay, we have also another question. It's a bit long. Sorry.
What's that? Sorry?
It says, how long would it take to rebuild a destroyed reef?
Well, this is, as I mentioned in my talk, a very slow growing corals, and that growth, it needs with the good conditions to attaching these broken pieces on this artificial reef, which we advanced the growth of the reef by using artificial reef, and these pieces we're hoping that it will stay there and build on that growth of the reef. And because we need to control the main problems we have around our reefs is sedimentation problems. We have really high moves around, and we need to control that, either by allowing more mooring sites for boats to connect on it.
Okay, another question. Is there any chance at all to have Kubbar, Garo, and Al-Maradim designated as protected nature reserves?
Well, it is highly likely to be, because EPA were an intention to do that, and I think they are about to announce these reefs, the 3 island reefs, as protected areas, as marine parks.
And another one, from where does the coral reef come from?
Coral, sorry?
Coral reef.
Larvae, okay. Coral comes from the site itself. We had documented in 2016, again, the spawning of coral reefs, and collecting these corals and having them spawned in the lab and having them spawned in the site where collected these larvae, and should be used to reseed these larvae on the side by control. You know, it's put with the nets and put these larvae to settle in the certain areas impacted most. And that is our next experiment will be holding afterward.
Okay, seeing as Kuwait's coral species live in extreme conditions, has your research or other research focusing on Kuwait's unique coral species and communities been used to benefit the understanding of the successful survival of these corals to help with other coral reefs, with other reefs that are recorded to have a decline due to bleaching?
Okay, this is actually the whole world is focused now, because our extreme environment had developed these reefs to stand strongly on these conditions, because it's really adaptation, as we say, extreme environment adaptation in the bleaching is recovery, because the bleaching recovery is happening year round. It is not like the worldwide happening only in the summer. We have extreme temperatures in the winter. It's around 13 degrees. And that also causes bleaching in winter, and also extreme temperatures in summer causing bleaching. And these two times had made these corals to really develop a strong recovery after this bleaching. So the chronic bleaching, it's recovering again. This is also an idea we are putting down to study how much of these corals bleached recovers and how much dies off. But it's most important, these still exist with these old conditions, still have them with no change, significant change around in these reefs with our permanent survey sites.
Okay, what are the stress on the coral patches along the coastline, and how do we protect them?
Coastal development, most important, or the most damaged in the coastal line corals. As I witnessed a patch of reef just ahead of Salmiya, and it is really an area that it is close by our station, and I had the chance to study it and look at it closely and bring back some samples in the lab to study them. But after that has been gone because of building a club next to it. And unfortunately, all the coastal development had caused all the coastal areas, reefs lost. If I could come back with the history, I would expect corals were next to the towers of Kuwait. But because of the coastal development, we have lost all these reefs, and we just end up in the southern parts.
What do sea urchins eat?
Algae, mostly algae. And accidentally they use, because they graze on these surfaces of dead corals with algae, covered with algae, and accidentally they eat from that skeleton and leave them white sand thrown in the beaches. That's why we have nice white beaches, because of the urchins. And also urchins allowing larvae, coral larvae to settle. So we are really happy to have these biodiversity, having the sea urchins balancing our side, coral reef sites with their existence. Sometimes we exist in high numbers because we have high damage. We have plenty of food, of algae around.
Okay, how can I help with keeping the reef safe?
Sorry again?
How can I help with keeping the reef safe?
Well, each individual can really highlight how important these reefs participate in campaigns. For example, these campaigns that we're planning to do for public awareness and using these broken pieces because of the divers, trainers around in these reefs. Accidentally, they break them off. Again, these people, they will be taught to bring these pieces, broken pieces, and grow them again on the sites where it can be recovered. As we call it, rescue. We had campaigns before. We called Reef Rescue, and that was a few attempts as volunteer works we had around in our reefs. With the help of you know, the Kuwait dive teams and you know, these volunteer groups, they concerned with our reefs since the early 90s when they were involved.
What exactly is spawning?
Spawning is when we having the corals itself reproduce by having eggs and sperms float in the surface. These eggs and sperms mix together, fertilize, and these eggs, it will be breaking down to develop the larvae as like small worms, and that small worms moves around where it found a space for it to settle, and it will be a spiral movement until it finds this is a really station, not a service of a turtle, not a service of any fish settling in the ground. So if it is found in a station, so it will build the first colony in that site. And that when it is, we call it recruits, coral recruits, built by larvae when they settle. And I had a really success study, done the recruits study on these 3 islands, and found the best recruits had happened around Garo Island. And therefore, Garo Island is the best coral reef developed in there.
That's really great, Doctor. If we are successful in having these crucial coral communities safe, would you think this could encourage the increase in Kuwait's marine biodiversity?
Definitely. Actually, when we tend to look after them, the biodiversity will increase. For example, having these turtles traveling from so far, coming back to our reefs to reproduce. A lot of these turtles, they get their hatchlings lost because of this buildings in the island made them to redirect it with the lights because they follow the moonlight to go back to in the sea, where they redirected to back in the island, so they suffocate and die off. We had to build a program of restoration for these hatchlings of hatchlings of turtles to save them and put them back in our marine environment, and that also will increase the biodiversity by controlling the algae in that area with sea urchins. Sea urchins also grazing on this algae, and also turtles will eat on these. Also, we had lost some of these big, as we say, game fish, parrotfish. And these are also controlling the number of sea urchins around, surgeonfish. They're controlling the number of sea urchins. You know, the balance that we should keep with the public awareness. If we keep these fishes around, no catch, no touching our diversity on these reefs, we can really protect it and enhance the condition of the biodiversity to be increasing.
Okay. Does the biodiversity change between bleached corals and recovered ones timeline?
Well, the bleached corals is not dying still, considering it it's a stage between either dying off or recovery. So bleached corals is a natural phenomena. It's happening and it's not causing any biodiversity loss, but it's a part of nature role in our coral reefs around, especially in Kuwait.
How and where can I volunteer to help save the reef?
How long? Sorry, what's that?
How and where can I volunteer to help save the reef?
Well, mostly what I found in the worldwide point of view, saving the reefs by now that notion is going on, reseeding these larvae, using like a protected area to have spawned corals, collecting these larvae and reseed them in areas impacted. And that has been a really success move in Indonesia, also in Philippines, and also it is around in Australia. Now, this is a big, huge campaigns and a huge budget for that is going on now.
Okay, thank you so much, Doctor. So thank you everyone for joining us today. Hope you enjoyed today's seminar, and we hope to see you in the Sheikh Abdullah Salam Cultural Center, especially in the Natural History Museum, to learn more about today's topic by visiting our rainforest and coral caves and also the touch pool. And we hope to see you again, and keep yourself updated with our social media. Thank you.